Earlier we showed a picture of Zina LaVey. It turns out that actually she was the daughter of Anton LaVey, not the wife. And when I showed Debbie Harry, it's curious, I forgot to mention, but it's curious that one of her songs, quite popular song, was Sunday Girl. I said there's a striking resemblance between her and Tuesday Weld, and then we have this Days of the Week motif. Maybe nothing to it, but you never know. But basically, when it comes to conspiracies, we could be here for years proving that fact. I mean, it's not really debatable that these conspiracies exist in the world. You only have to ask the family of Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, who was forced to commit suicide by the Nazis because he and many other generals at the time started to twig what was going on. That ultimately, Hitler and many of the other leaders of the Nazi Party were not only funded from New York, but were basically in the pay of the British government. And anyone who would find that fact out, anybody who would find out that these people were not German for Germany or any of this nonsense, they were they were got rid of. They were compromised and politically and often physically assassinated. Go and ask the descendants of the Nicholas Romanov family who were executed that there's no such thing as conspiracy in the world, and the events that surround them. An intricate web of conspiracy. And also the fact that when they realized that finally Russia was lost to them, they petitioned their cousins and their direct blood kin in England, to let them come to England. And the British royal family refused to house the emperor. They refused to receive him and his family. So he had to stay in Russia and fall foul of the assassins, the Bolshevik assassins. Well, what's with that? Another interesting anecdote, because people are always asking, Michael, it's impossible, no secret society could just come in and take over the world. History tells us different. During the time of the Norman conquest, back in 1066, the famous Battle of Hastings and all of that, William of Normandy, William the Conqueror, by the time that the Normans had ensconced themselves in Britain, by the time that the famous Doomsday Book was compiled, and by the way, the Doomsday Book was a meticulous economic research of every single field, plot of land, and every animal. And the Doomsday Book recorded every animal owned in every farm down to the pig, down to the individual pig. This was back in the 11th century. That much precision. And behind them was the Vatican, of course. Literally going there to take an audit on exactly what was of wealth and of value in the land of England. And by the time that the Normans, as I say, were ensconced in England, did you know that the whole of England was owned by just 100 families? And half the country was owned by 11 families? 100 families owned England at the time of the Norman conquest, and half the country was in the control of only 11 ruling families. So, don't ever tell me that a small group can't come in and take over. Nothing could be easier. History already tells you the case. But when it comes to the situation of Russia, and many other fascinating details pertaining to Hitler and the true origin of the Nazis, always must recommend the works of Yuri Lina. Both his books, Under the Sign of the Scorpion, which is an absolute masterpiece on the subject, and he calls it Scorpion because he shows the astrological tie-in, the occult tie-ins, and how much was done during the sign of Scorpio and Sagittarius. An incredible book, also as Architects of Deception, in which he goes into the true origins, the family, and political orientation of the Nazis, who they really were, who these real criminals were. And he himself was on the KGB hit list, and that's why he moved to Sweden to continue his phenomenal research. People should really check out his work and his DVDs as well. And he points out what should be obvious when you study the symbolism, that there's one cabal, left or right, as we've been saying numerous times now. The symbolism tells you that it's straight out of the same lexicon. It's almost their version of the Madison Avenue And a meticulous study of Nazi symbolism is also a fascinating thing. I wish we had more time to go into that, because you'll find something very interesting. And that is that these so-called pagan, anti-Christian, almost atheistic people have symbols straight from the Bible, straight from the Old Testament, straight from the lexicon of Judaism and Kabbalism, and straight from the royal houses. Nazi regalia, a lot of this hasn't been seen, featured not only royal lions, but here's a belt buckle with God with us. Mit us, God with us. That translates in Hebrew into Emmanuel. That's what the word Emmanuel in Hebrew means, God with me or God with us. Well, wait a minute, I thought on paper these guys were absolutely 100% against Christianity, and surely if you watched any portrayals of the Nazi party on the television, right, run by the media, and all those spectacles and pagan festivities and rites and rituals of Nazism, you'd imagine that they were contradictory, right, to anything to do with Christianity. But as a matter of fact, that's not true. Then you study the fact that the Vatican had a hand in saving the top Nazis and getting them out. That they were, as I said last time we met, that Mussolini was tied in with the Vatican, gave them back their papal states. Go to the regalia. This stuff that's been hidden is really fascinating. Hebrew, God with us. Straight out of the Bible, straight out of Jewish Old Testament tradition. Incredible. Here's, I say, the royal lions on the lapels. But, I mean, I've been saying it for years, that the very fact that they're using iron crosses, which eventually go back to the Knights Templars, or the oak leaves, you see, which are druidic and all of this. Swastikas, the runes, all going back to astrotheology. Again, emphasize again that behind the lodge door the divisions are meaningless. That's just for us. That's just the carnival. The head of the Order of Malta, he's dead now I think, but he was the 78th Grand Master, Andrew Bertie, is actually directly related to the Queen of England. Roman Catholic on one side, right, Knights of Malta, headquarters in the Vatican. Queen of England, Order of St. John, Order of the Garter, Order of the St. George and St. Michael, Protestant on the surface. They're the same family. It's the old Merovingians, the old Carolingians. They're a small group, so they have to use these things we're exploring because they know that they'd be wiped out. They know they have enemies. So they have made great use of all of these, of all of this wardrobe to keep us befuddled and amused. Edward Berman, in his book The Assassins, The Holy Killers of Islam, says that all revolutionaries and murderers since then have been part of a single Templar society, including Cromwell, the murderer of Henry IV of France, conspirators in Portugal, Brazil and Sweden, and of course Robespierre and Danton. They're from Switzerland, the headquarters of the Templars. There's even a city in Sweden, in Switzerland, called Tsarion, after the old Order of Tsarion, you see. Cromwell, he's meant to be a Protestant. How did he get his armor? He defeated his enemy because he had better guns, weapons and armor. Who supplied it? Manasseh ben Israel, a Jewish banker who themselves, the Jews, had been banned from England, so he was ensconced in France and also Spain, and funded the Roundheads to overthrow King Charles so that they could get back into the country. But Cromwell on paper is meant to be a Protestant. These contradictions are very important. But coming back more to the Dionysian aspects of all of this, the fixation of the teen, the child, the sacrificial child, and the whole pedophilia network that goes with that is of great fascination to these people. Here's the tomb of Enrico Baccardi, Masonic obelisk. Same thing goes for Bronfman and many of the other families, you see, that control this, the drugs and the alcohol. Why use a vampire bat is worrisome enough as your logo, hiding behind the idea that they're philanthropists. Here's their headquarters in Porto, Portugal, featuring hellish-looking flames about 10 foot high, you know, a vampire bat in the middle. Go figure. But again, the symbolism tells us something, and the basically pornographic, debauched, suggestive, advertising, you see, is part of this pestilence, is part of this psychic dictatorship, psychic tyranny we've been talking about. And these Brahmins and Bacardis and what have you, here's Aaron Spelling, all these people in the media, they are rewarded with the billions that they have. And then with those monies they may go and design their houses to look like the vulture, the eagle, the Masonic, pyramidical designs. This is another interesting motif.